and welcome to The Right Side, the show where we talk about today's news, views, and trends, as well as opinions from an admittedly conservative perspective. I'm your host, Chris Pareja, and I'm looking forward to going right after the third rail, sticking our tongue into it, and seeing what we can get as far as a charge with our upcoming guest, Trevor Loudon. He's the author of The Enemies Within. We'll be talking a little bit about socialism, communism, the folks that have infiltrated our government, and why it matters anyway. Trevor, thanks for joining us.
Great to be here, Chris. Thanks for having me on. And
so tell us a little bit. You've had quite a long walk to get to this part of the country. Where are you normally based?
Look, I'm from Christchurch, New Zealand, and I grew up with all the values that one would grow up with in New Zealand, a socialist from birth. And I converted later in life, and now I'm here.
And so Christchurch, New Zealand, and you're making a living right now poking U.S. politicians in the eye. What got you interested in doing that?
Look, it goes way back into the 80s. But in 1984, my country elected a socialist Labour government. One of the very first things they did was to ban nuclear warships from our harbours. Now, that was instigated by the New Zealand peace movement, and that destroyed the Australia, New Zealand, United States military alliance, ANZUS, killed it stone cold dead. Now, this was a country that had been saved by America in World War II. And a generation later, we were basically banning your warships from our harbours. And that intrigued me, how that could happen. I interviewed over a period of several months a New Zealander who had infiltrated the New Zealand Communist Party for our security intelligence services. He was a government spy inside the communists. Okay, in 83, he worked his way up. In 1983, he was sent to Moscow to train at Lenin's Institute for Higher Learning. This was the training academy for the future world communist leadership. 6,000 students from countries all over the world. And while he was in Moscow in 83, he helped to plan New Zealand's anti-nuclear stand, because the Soviets were putting a lot of effort into destroying NATO. In Europe, they were sponsoring all these big anti-NATO demonstrations in Europe. Thousands of people waving "Ban the Bomb" banners, marching through Rome and Paris, and every weekend for months and months and months. And what the Soviets wanted to do was to take New Zealand out of the military alliance with the United States and use that example to spur on the European peace movement to destroy NATO. It was a very subtle chess move. So the Soviets, through using the New Zealand communists who controlled the New Zealand labour unions and the New Zealand peace movement, were able to take Moscow's policies back to their country and turn it into New Zealand Labour Party policy and destroy a military alliance with your country, and not one New Zealander in virtually 4 million had any idea of what had taken place. And that, the big thing he taught me was this: the big secret of communism is the ability of a tiny Marxist-Leninist party to influence and even control the legislative process in their country. And that's happening in spades in this country right now.
And so it seems like a tactic that's been used before for communists to take over, you said, the labor movement?
Yeah.
And did they use environmentalists back then along with peace movements?
Look, certainly, organisations like Greenpeace were heavily infiltrated by Marxists. But see, what happened the big thing happened in the United States in 1995. Because before that time, your AFL-CIO, your main union body, was controlled by hardcore anti-communists like Lane Kirkland and George Meany. But in 1995, Democratic Socialists of America, your largest Marxist group, a Gramsciist communist organisation, they took over the AFL-CIO that year. They got rid of Lane Kirkland and they put their member John Sweeney in as president. And from that vantage point, they took over the Democratic Party. Because if you think about it, there's hardly a Democrat at any level in your country, an elected official, who doesn't owe his job to the labour unions. Mm-hmm. So by the Marxists taking over the labour unions, they were able to dictate policy to the Democratic Party. That's why the Democrats have gone so far to the left in the last 15 years, and all the moderates and centrist Democrats like Joe Lieberman from Connecticut have been purged. Mm-hmm. Basically the Marxists, 20,000 Marxists in this country are controlling the policies of the Democratic Party and the direction of the Democratic Party, and all those poor Democrats who still think they're voting for Harry Truman and JFK have no idea what's happened to them.
So our friends that might be union members or they might be rank and file Democrats often have no idea whatsoever that they are being run by this leftist regime.
No, they're being totally scammed, and I'll give you a great example. You think about it, 20 years ago, the AFL-CIO was leading the charge against illegal immigration in this country. They were constantly lobbying Congress to increase penalties on any employer caught employing illegal immigrants, because they saw that illegal immigrants were unfair competition for union members, right? Very logical, you know. Illegals drive wages and conditions down.
Cesar Chavez would agree.
Cesar Chavez would agree. Now who's leading the charge to legalise illegal immigrants? It's the unions, the AFL-CIO, because it's not that the principles have changed in 20 years. It's the fact that before 1995. The unions were there to support the interests of their members. After 1995, they were there to promote socialist revolution. The Marxists took over the unions, and they want to flood the country with illegal immigrants, make them citizenship, give them voting rights, and give the Democrats 8, 10, 12 million more votes, and turn this country into a one-party state. That's why they're doing it, and they're selling out their own union members right now, taking their money and selling them out because the revolution comes first.
And California has already gotten this concept pretty strongly.
It started here. It started under... See, Bert Corona was a big Communist Party member in LA in the 1960s. He started the immigrants' rights movement. He was also a Democrat. He set up the Viva Kennedy clubs, the first organised effort to bring Latinos into the Democratic Party. But he also trained hundreds of disciples to carry on his work, and 3 of them are very prominent today. One of them was Antonio Villagrosa, who was until recently the mayor of Los Angeles. He turned LA he was a Marxist. He turned LA into a sanctuary city. He forbade the LAPD from enforcing immigration laws, and the illegals flooded in. Another member of this group is Gil Cedillo, who was until recently the head of the California State Senate, a Communist Party supporter, a disciple of Corona's. He got the DREAM Act pushed through in California a couple of years ago, which gave all sorts of so-called rights to the children of undocumented workers. But the third member of this group, another Marxist, the most powerful woman in California in my opinion, that's Maria Elena Durazo, the head of the California AFL-CIO. She is the one behind the massive union-driven and paid for Latino voter registration drives and get out the vote efforts that have added hundreds of thousands of Latino voters to the California rolls in the last 15 years, almost all of them Democrats. The result of this deliberate Marxist program has been to turn California, once a reddish, purplish state carried by both Reagan and Nixon, to a solidly blue state. And that's very important when it comes to presidential politics.
Right.
It was a deliberate program.
But the good news is that's only the unions, the peace movement, the environmentalists in California. It couldn't happen in the federal government, right?
Well, the unfortunate thing is, yes. What my book documents, what I say is this: there's at least 100 members of your house. Put it this way: if you apply for a job in the federal government, at any level, you need an FBI security clearance. Because they need to trust you. They go into your family background, any dodgy relatives you might have, overseas travel, education, drug habits. They need to trust you because you might be working for the enemy. But what happens if you're a young Marxist radical like Nancy Pelosi or Barbara Lee or
Barack
Obama, who hangs around with the local Marxists, who control the local unions, who control the Democratic Party, and they can get you elected to Congress or the Senate, and you can serve on the Homeland Security Committee or the Science and Technology Committee or the Armed Services Committee or even the Intelligence Committee, and have access to all sorts of government secrets and the ability to steer public policy in all sorts of directions. How much of an FBI security clearance do you need for that one?
You could even be an attorney general or something, given that scenario.
Eric Holder, total Marxist background. And this is an incestuous takeover of the country, and they're exploiting the fact that your members of Congress and Senate do not require any security checks. So the Marxists have this massive hole in your national security that they are driving their supporters into. They're using the Congressional Black Caucus, the Congressional Progressive Caucus, the Congressional Asia Pacific Caucus, set up by Judy Chu, an old friend of the Communist Workers' Party, to basically bring Marxist policy into the Democratic Party and run the country through that. So I say this, there's at least 100 members of your House and 20 members of your Senate who wouldn't get a basic security clearance to clean the toilets at any military base in your country, and neither would your president. And you'd have to be very naive to think your enemies are not taking advantage of that.
So the automatic assumption or the rebuttal from our friends who consider themselves left of center I could see Facebook lighting up already with, you're just a racist, what do you know, you're from New Zealand anyway, and please stop name calling, you're calling people communists and socialists and Marxists, that's just name calling. Well, why do you have to do that kind of thing?
Well, if somebody self-identifies as a Democrat, is it okay to call them a Democrat? Is that name calling?
No.
So if somebody hangs around with Marxists, attends Marxist conferences, promotes Marxist policy, writes for Marxist newspapers, and then stands for Congress, is it legitimate to call them a Marxist sympathizer?
Or if they're members of the Democratic Socialists of America or blatantly the Communist Party?
Yeah. Look, as I say, my book's 700 pages long, 80 pages of that's footnotes. I spent 5 years in obscure libraries all over your country, in San Francisco and Washington State, going through communist archives to find the evidence I've got. I don't call a single person a communist or a socialist who I cannot amply demonstrate with screenshots, documentary evidence, etc. The fact is this: your enemies, after they took over the unions, they decided to take over your Congress because you had a massive hole in your national security, no security checks. The greatest prize in the world is the federal government of the United States. If you control that, you control the direction of the world. Do you think your enemies in Iran and China and Cuba are so stupid and lazy that they would not take advantage of that?
Sounds like you've got a couple of other books coming if you're going to highlight those.
I've got many more books coming, many more.
Because there are also infiltrations underfoot from some of those countries that you've outlined as well. But so tell me, I mean, communism's popular in other parts of the world, or at least it thrives there, whether it's popular or not, or whether it's good for anybody. Who cares if a few communists get in? What harm could it do?
Well, it could do a lot of harm. If you go back to the Vietnam War, I'll give you an example. So this has been going on for a while. In the Vietnam War, you lost 55,000 men and lost a country and lost a war and lost a massive amount of international prestige. That war was lost not in the jungles, but because your soldiers were hamstrung every step of the way. They couldn't bomb this, they couldn't go here, they couldn't do this. Any soldier who's had experience in Vietnam will tell you their hands were tied behind their back. And when your troops were withdrawn, the Vietnamese government was defunded and the communist victory was inevitable. Who did that? It was Democrats in your Congress who are working very closely with the Communist Party USA, which was working very closely under the direction of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, which was allied to the Communist Party of North Vietnam. You had people in your government deliberately sabotaging your own troops in the field to the benefit of your enemies, and not one of them ever paid a penalty. So what I'm saying is this: Obamacare, on the verge of socialising between 1/6 and 1/4 of your economy, totally the tool, totally the baby of Democratic Socialists of America. I can prove it 100%. Comprehensive immigration reform. If they get 11 or 12 million or 20 million illegals citizenship and voting rights, the Democrats will have a one-party state in this country. The Republicans can never elect another president. And I will tell you this, I don't think even a lot of Democrats would want a one-party state.
I have friends who self-identify as progressives, and they're here in California, and it scares the daylights out of them to know that we are basically in California a one-party state. They want to see opposition. They want to see ideas discussed, because even though they consider themselves progressive because it's a cool term to use, and who wants to be backwards, which would be the opposite of progressive, right? They can't understand how this can be allowed to happen, and they don't self-identify as socialists or communists necessarily. Some do, but this is a scary thing for anyone to go unopposed and move through.
Well, it's a scary thing unless you're one of the people who want to be that government. But you say, well, what's it matter if a few communists dictate policy? Well, what did it matter in Germany in 1933 if a few Nazis got into the government? They were a minority. They were never going to get power, were they? You know, and their opposition, who could have beaten them, didn't, because they didn't take the Nazis seriously.
Right.
And we all suffered the huge consequences of that.
Right.
So I'm saying major policy decisions in this country, the Constitution is being trashed right now by people you are paying salaries to, who do not owe your allegiance to your country, but owe allegiance to foreign powers. But members of the Congressional Black Caucus are going down to Cuba on a regular basis to confer with the Castro brothers. I quote Raul Castro in my book, boasting about this, how they talk to him, how they're going to change policies in your government to ease trade and travel restrictions on Cuba. So basically the Cubans can send more spies and terrorists to your country. So what do you call it when someone goes from your country to an enemy foreign country to help them against you?
I call it treason.
Well, it's happening every day. It's happening every day, and nobody calls it out because it is so endemic. It's the old saying, you know, why doth treason never prosper? Because when treason prospers, none dare call it treason. It's so endemic now. It is the way things are done.
Right. So tell us a little bit about some of the highlights we can find in your book, and also a little bit about how you would recommend that we reverse this path.
Well, the book basically details the takeover of the Democratic Party over the last 15 years. So now the Democratic Party is basically controlled by Marxists, just as Vegas was once controlled by the mob. And they are dictating the policies that rule the lives of 300 million Americans. Then I profile 51 members of the House and 14 senators who are the worst offenders, the most obviously under Marxist and communist direction. And some of these people are working with the Chinese, some of them are working with the Cubans, some are even working with the Iranians, sworn enemies of this country. I'll give one example. John Conyers, the man in Congress, long-time head of the Judiciary Committee, the body that writes the laws in America and the body that oversees the Federal Bureau of Investigation and grants the budget to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Now, John Conyers has a 50-year history with the Communist Party USA, 40 years with Democratic Socialists of America, and is even closely associated with the Workers' World Party, which is a pro-North Korean, pro-Iranian outfit. Now, this guy is a total Marxist. He's an enemy of the United States, but the FBI has to go to him to get its budget. So is the FBI ever going to investigate John Conyers or any of his other colleagues in Congress? Or
if he gives them instruction that's going to be dependent upon, or their funding is dependent upon, will they run the other direction? The answer is probably not.
Well, if he tells them they should be investigating the Tea Party movement, for instance, what do you think they're going to start doing? They're going to take their eye off the communists and Marxists and the real dangers, and they're going to start persecuting grandmas and granddads and the salt of the earth in this country.
Right.
They will become a new Gestapo. So those are the kind of thing the book gets into. I don't pull any punches, I'll tell you straight. People can learn more about my work by going to my daily blog, which is trevorloudon.com. My books are advertised on there, for instance. You can get my books online. The first book was about Obama. This book's about the about the Congress. And I have another website called KeyWiki, Keywiki, and that is like a Wikipedia. It profiles 64,000 American leftists, communists, Marxists, radicals, from the street level right up to the White House and every step in between. You know, the leading leftist organizations, a whole bunch of your members of Congress, a whole bunch of your senators, Obama, George Soros, right down to the street level radicals. And some of them become big time, like Van Jones was a San Francisco street level radical who became a top advisor to the Obama administration. And you know, we'll take some credit there. I exposed him for his communist background, and Glenn Beck got him kicked out of the White House. So this is a pretty deep problem. So
we've just got a few minutes left. How would you fix it? What can citizens do?
Well, I don't want to seem partisan here, but you got to look at this. The Democrats are now controlled by the Marxists. The Republican Party is controlled by progressives, rhinos who really don't believe in much, and a growing Tea Party conservative insurgency. The real battle for the future of this country is the battle for the Republican Party. Because if the Ted Cruzes and the Rand Pauls get ahead and take over that party, they can take out the Democrats and restore the Constitution and restore the economy and do the things that need to be done, the hardcore actions. If they don't, if the old guard, the John Boehners and Karl Roves have their way, basically the Democrats will become the permanent governing majority in this country, and they will be controlled by the Marxists and the communists. So really what I'm saying is people have got to support those efforts to restore the Republican Party to its conservative roots and get the Republicans to take over the Senate, hold the House, and get the presidency, and then start gutting the federal government. Absolutely gutting it. Bringing it back, as Grover Norquist says, to the size where it could be strangled in a bathtub. You know, that's the only thing that's going to save America right now, because the government is so out of control.
And so when you're saying conservatives, et cetera, you're not necessarily talking about conservative on the social issue side. You're just talking about the smaller government, sane spending, local control elements.
The big issues are the Constitution, fiscal responsibility, strong national defense, and education. Those, if you can fix all of those, I'm not really here to worry about marijuana law reform or all the big social issues that people get caught up on. We're fighting a war for the future of this country, and if America goes down, every Western country is going to go afterwards.
Right.
Don't think you can bug out to New Zealand. If you go down, the Chinese will have us in a heartbeat. Russians will have Europe. Iran will have the Middle East. Most of Latin America is already communist. Most of Africa is under Chinese control. There is nowhere to run. So the real battle for freedom right now has been fought in America.
Well, so again, I need your website and your blog so people can find out more.
Okay, the daily blog is trevorloudon.com. Loudon is Loudon. The website is KeyWiki, the big database website is KeyWiki, Keywiki.
Well, Trevor, thank you for joining us and educating us. You've educated Californians on probably more than they know about what's happening in California, so thank you. And if you hold on for just a moment, we'll be right back after a word from our underwriter, the Conservative Forum.
The Conservative Forum of Silicon Valley began with 20 conservatives meeting at a restaurant in November of 2003. Our mission is to promote the principles of American liberty through education. By 2012, we had grown to over 600 paid members. Our monthly meetings feature well-known and prestigious conservative speakers addressing issues that are critical to our country's very survival. This includes speakers like Victor Davis Hanson, Andrew Breitbart, David Horowitz, and many others. In addition to our monthly meetings, we sponsor a conservative local cable access TV show, The Right Side, covering today's topics. Our Constitution discussion group not only teaches the Constitution, but started our annual essay contest that awards 2 $1,000 scholarships to local high school seniors. We are a virtual clearinghouse for grassroots organizations by providing them with table space at no charge in our exhibit area. There are typically a dozen groups represented. If you are like-minded, join us at our next meeting and become motivated and empowered. Liberty, made in America.
And welcome back to the right side. That was a word from our underwriters, the Conservative Forum. And while we appreciate tremendously them making this show possible, what they're really best known for is their speaker series. And the reason we were able to have Trevor on the show this evening is because he'll be speaking later tonight at 7 o'clock at 432 Stearland Road, right here in Mountain View, at the IFES Portuguese Hall for the Conservative Forum this month. Coming speakers include August 5th. We'll have a speaker from the Gun Owners of America speaking about the Second Amendment. In September, Mark Mix, president of the National Right to Work, will be speaking. In October 7th, I'm sure it's going to be a hot night conversation-wise. Pam Geller will be there. She's a blogger and commentator on Islam, and that is considered a special event. If you have additional questions about the content and programming at the Conservative Forum, you can find information at theconservativeforum.com. And in closing tonight, I just wanted to highlight that what Trevor's talking about is heavily researched, and as he mentioned, 80 of the 700 pages in his book are footnotes proving where he got the information, and this is from the sources themselves. I do encourage you to learn more about him, to learn more on his blog and at his website, because really, if our government is indeed being infiltrated, if it is a situation where we have major national security loopholes, we need to figure out as a country how to fix those, how to reverse the trend, and how to restore our control of our country. Again, this has been The Right Side. I've been your host, Chris Pareja, and I'll look forward to seeing you again on the show or in person sometime soon. Have a great night.